Hello and welcome. You watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you with all the top news stories from around the globe. Let's get started with our big focus. France's far right is in polling. If polling in the second round scheduled for the 7th of July follows a similar trend, the far right in France is likely to form the government and stake claim to the post of Prime Minister. Supporters of Marine Le Pen's anti-immigration national rally is already celebrating. She says the president's Macronist bloc has been all but wiped out. The national rally won 33% of the vote. The left-wing coalition, the New Popular Front, came second at 28% and the Macron camp a distant third with less than 21% of the vote. Marine Le Pen's protege and National Rally co-leader, 28-year-old Jordan Bardella, has stated, and I quote, "I aim to be Prime Minister for all the French people if the French give us their votes." Here is what is truly significant. Never before has the far right won the first round of a French parliamentary election. Even the fact that it has become possible is historic. However, what Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella want is an absolute majority of 289 seats in the 577-seat National Assembly. Seat projections for next Sunday's second round runoff suggest they may fall short. Without an absolute majority, France will have a hung parliament, and National Rally will be unable to push through its plans for immigration, tax cuts and law and order. If, on the other hand, things go their way, it could spell political disaster for Emmanuel Macron's centrist bloc and for the French president's remaining 3 years in office. Many analysts argue there was no need for Emmanuel Macron to call the snap election and that it was a reckless gamble. Last month, President Macron dissolved parliament and called a snap poll just an hour after his centrist Together alliance was trounced by the National Rally, adding that he could not resign himself to the far right's progress everywhere in the continent. It is believed that Macron wanted to break the logjam after his failure to secure an absolute majority in the National Assembly in June 2022. Passing laws had become a headache. He had to force through pension reforms without a vote, while tougher immigration rules required National Rally support. That gamble now threatens to turn the political order on its head, with 10.6 million French citizens voting for the National Rally and some of the conservative Republicans who backed them. The turnout at 66.7% was the highest for a parliamentary first round since 1997. After just the first round, 37 National Rally MPs have been elected by winning more than half the vote. Hundreds of left-wing voters gathered in Paris to voice their anger and shock at the right-wing's success. French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal has said the time has come for a broad, clearly Democratic and Republican alliance for the second round of voting. He added it was a moral duty to bar the far right from governing the country with its disastrous project. But remember, if the far right gets an absolute majority, their candidate will replace the current Prime Minister. It has been a long journey for the National Rally, from its roots on the extreme right fringe of French society to securing the support of 1 in 3 French voters. They have a charismatic young leader who could be France's next Prime Minister, and a set of policies that range from banning mobile phones in classrooms and cutting taxes on energy to removing benefits from foreigners. The party is best known for its staunch anti-immigrant and anti-Islam stance. With this parliamentary election, France has entered uncharted territory, and that perhaps explains why so many people are angry with President Macron. Next Sunday's runoff round will feature either duels between two parties or three-way races known as triangulaires. The left-wing alliance and Macron's parties have called for tactical voting in an attempt to keep the National Rally out and to prevent it from taking control of the National Assembly. If the former succeeds, the result could be months of political paralysis and negotiations to find a solution for a sustainable government that can survive no confidence votes. These parliamentary elections will not directly affect Emmanuel Macron's own job, as they are separate from the presidential elections, and his term as president still runs for another 3 years. Macron has said whoever wins in the second round, he will not resign as president. However, if National Rally secures a majority in Parliament, then it could open the door to 3 years of power sharing, when the president of one party heads the state and another party runs the government. It is known as cohabitation. It has happened before. There have been 3 periods of cohabitation in France in the past. But nothing has prepared France for the kind of cohabitation that could occur after the 7th of July, where a centrist president could share power with a far-right prime minister. Macron could see his powers significantly diminished. Also, the arrival of anti-immigration and Eurosceptic National Rally in government would be a turning point in French modern history, and the first time a far-right force would have taken power in the country since World War II, when it was occupied by Nazi Germany. The question we're asking on Global Lens tonight is this: has Macron's gamble spectacularly backfired? What do these parliamentary elections and the surge of the far-right mean for France and Europe? First, the European Parliament elections, now the French parliamentary polls. What does the meteoric rise of the far-right tell us about the direction in which Europe is headed? Is an overarching anti-immigration sentiment coupled with rising inflation and a prohibitive cost of living driving their growing popularity and the rapid decline of both left-wing and centrist parties? What is the larger message from the voters for political parties in Europe? What impact could all of this have on the future of the continent? And could this development have ramifications even beyond Europe?
Exit polls showed that Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party won the first round of parliamentary elections in France on Sunday, but the final result will depend on days of hard bargaining before the second round of voting next week. Sunday's outcome is a major blow to President Emmanuel Macron, who stunned the nation when he called for snap elections after his party was trounced by the National Rally Party in European Parliament elections earlier this month. In a speech to supporters Sunday night, Le Pen said her party's victory was decisive.
My dear compatriots, democracy has spoken, and the French people have placed the National Rally and its allies on top, and have practically wiped out President Macron's party.
Le bloc macroniste.
The results were in line with opinion polls ahead of the election, but provided little clarity on whether Le Pen's anti-immigrant Eurosceptic party will be able to form a government and coexist with pro-EU Macron after next Sunday's second round of voting is concluded. A week of tough political decisions now lies ahead. In the past, center-right and center-left parties have teamed up to keep the National Rally from power, but that dynamic is less certain than ever. A longtime pariah, the far-right National Rally is now closer to power than it has ever been. Le Pen has sought to clean up the image of her party. Known for racism and anti-Semitism, her efforts appear to have worked amid voter anger at Macron, the high cost of living, and growing concerns over immigration.
My dear compatriots, democracy has spoken, and the French have placed the National Rally and its allies on top and have practically erased Macron's bloc. It was especially decisive to give Jordan Bardella an absolute majority in the National Assembly to launch starting next week the recovery of France and the restoration of unity and national harmony.
I have said it, to have the project that I am carrying out for the country voted on, I need an absolute majority in the French National Assembly. So, either the French grant me this absolute majority or they will take the risk of seeing the new Popular Front, left-wing parties alliance, come to the head of the country. I don't want that for France. I believe that there are many French people who don't want this for France. And I even believe that there are voters today, including within the presidential majority, who were able to vote for French President Emmanuel Macron, who are confused by this alliance of carp and rabbit between Mr. Macron and Mr. Mélenchon, France's unbowed party leader. This is not an anti-RN front. I saw an alliance that does not make sense between Mr. Mélenchon and Mr. Macron, which is an alliance of dishonor both for one and for the other.
All right, time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens. But on the other side, we're going to discuss with our panel of experts what these election results really mean for France and Europe. "20,000 people dead and counting." What's happening in the United States of America is unprecedented. You will have to pay for this.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
This is News9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the results of the first round of parliamentary elections in France. Joining me on the show tonight is Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former Indian diplomat, Chirayu Thakkar, doctoral candidate of international relations at the National University of Singapore, and Pathikrit Pain, foreign affairs analyst. Thank you to all of you for joining me, and a warm welcome. Ambassador Goyal, let me begin with you. You know, whether it was the European Parliament elections or the first round of parliamentary elections in France, what is quite evident is that Europe currently is witnessing a surge of the far right. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of what is driving this surge and the decline of the centrist and left parties, let me ask you this question. How worried should Emmanuel Macron be at this point in time, and has his gamble spectacularly backfired, you think?
Difficult question there, but I would say he should be very, very worried yet. Because I was hearing what you said about 3 years of cohabitation. We should also recall that the president has a right to call for a new parliamentary election, but after 1 year. So the period of cohabitation will be 1 year, not 3 years. But 1 year of cohabitation, which is quite likely possible in case a Lopez candidate, the far right RM Bitzer, comes to the government. 1 year of period would be difficult, both for the French role in the European Union, French role vis-a-vis the USA, the French role vis-a-vis China and the Russian Federation. But I think what is more likely to happen is, from what I understand, from some of the experts on the elections happening, the process happening now in France, is that RN may not come back with an absolute 50% majority. And if that happens, Macron will have a difficult task to find a candidate, a consensus candidate as the prime minister for the next 1 year before he can call the elections. So on the whole, difficult time, both for the French domestic politics and the French relations, both within the European Union and with the USA. I will confine myself to these remarks for the time being there.
All right. That is certainly interesting. Thanks for laying it out for us. Pathikrit Pain, let me come to you now. First and foremost, You know, many are asking in France today, what was Emmanuel Macron thinking? There are people who've taken to the streets of Paris to express their anger over the win of the far right. They are angry with President Macron for having called a snap election, which many say was totally unnecessary. Though when his party got a drubbing in the recent European Parliament elections, Emmanuel Macron said, you know, I have heard the voice and the message of the people, and France needs, you know, a clear majority, and we need to work together in harmony. That's why we need to have a parliamentary election. Perhaps he was hoping that, you know, the absolute majority that eluded him in June 2022 could come now following this snap poll. But going by the outcome of the first round, his calculation seems to have completely misfired. And if the second round goes pretty much the same way, then even if Marine Le Pen's party does not gain an absolute majority to have total control of the National Assembly, even if they are not in a position to stake claim to the post of the Prime Minister, they will have enough numbers in the French Parliament to in fact present a far bigger headache for Emmanuel Macron, who of course will continue as president.
Good evening, Neha. See, a bunch of people protesting that the far right is coming cannot deny the fact that it is the people of France who have, with equal democratic rights, who have voted for Marine Le Pen's party. Emmanuel Macron, whatever he did, I'm sure he's the best judge for that. But if he had called for the election 6 months later, it would have been even more worse. Because the situation in France and in many of the Western European countries, each is worse than the other. Let me tell you, it is not a question of whether far right is coming or not. It is a question of the level of frustration the people of these countries have today, and these so-called liberal parties, the kind of mess they have created because of their own illusions of how the world should be run according to their whims. What is the problem in France? What is the problem in Germany and many of the other Western European countries where you see the same trend of the so-called right-wing parties coming to power or gaining popularity? Number one, they keep on triggering conflicts, keep on sustaining conflicts, keep on funding conflicts at the cost of their own voters, at the cost of the economic condition of their own countries. Secondly, they keep on bringing in immigrants. There has to be times are pardoned or overlooked on the pretext that if you take action, then you will be termed as racism. I mean, then who actually voted for Macron? It is the same voters who are today going to the other way around. Let me also add one thing. Europe today, especially Western Europe, has outsourced manufacturing to China, outsourced energy security to Russia, outsourced their physical military security to United States, and still they believe they can rule the world, they can dictate terms. They keep on wasting money on conflicts which could have been avoided. The outcome, today the price of energy has gone up by 10 times in most of the Western European countries. I mean, what kind of mindset these leaders had when they went and agreed to, sabotage those Russian pipelines and sanctions on Russia, knowing well that the entire infrastructure for energy in Western Europe and Central Europe is Russia-centric, knowing well it will impact their own people. What kind of delusional world they live in? And the condition in United States is the same. I often say it, Neha, rise of so-called right-wing is always and most of the time because of idiosyncrasy of some of the self-proclaimed liberal, parties. Let me also say, liberalism is a great thing, but liberalism does not mean to ignore your own country's people at the cost of others. Liberalism is a great thing, but doesn't mean that for the sake of so-called liberty, you keep on messing up, creating conflicts everywhere. Liberalism is a great thing, but not at the cost of ignoring and defying your own country's culture. That is where these right-wing parties get the opportunity to come back. So the mess that Macron has created for himself and his own country, it is Macron's own doing and nobody else's. Why on earth people of France and Germany must spend money to fund Ukraine's war? Why on earth they have to pay the money for the bill for the immigrants that they brought in? If you can't afford to give good life to the immigrants, then let's not bring them. And if you bring them and you keep on getting habit, because you can't create jobs for them, you keep on doling out subsidies and all kind of allowances, someday you have to stop it because you don't have money today. And then what you do? Then you ask your own voters to pay more, to more taxes, to reduce pension, and that's where the mess starts. Eventually, let me also, my last point, Neha, Macron was voted not by the illegal immigrants, but the people of France. He should have taken care of them first. Same for Germany, same for many other countries, and that's why today they are called what? Lame ducks. Even then, in the G7, they kept on deciding and discussing what they should do to Russia, not even realizing their own future, political future next year is not decided. So the reality is, whether it is good news for the world or bad, I don't know. Because the rise of this right wing eventually may create problems. But please understand, the average voter is a peace-loving person who expects their government to take care of them and not to mess around, create conflict in the rest of the places just because you have become the leader of a nuclear-powered country. So this is where a lot of realization should come for Macron and others, instead of dog whistling that if the right wing comes, this would happen, that would happen. First of all, correct the messes that you have created, whether it is Biden, whether it is Macron, whether it is Scholz in Germany. They are all the same, and the mess they have created, the people are voting and responding to that. Otherwise, it would not have been so. Nobody wants, and let me last point, Neha, let's understand where the problem with right wing is. None of these countries were at good terms with each other 80 years, before 80 years. They were at war with each other. So if this right wing rises in each of the countries, you never know. It may not happen in one day. The potential possibility of EU eventually imploding, it cannot be ruled out, because the history of the world for the last 300, 400 years has been the history of the French or the Germans, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British empires fighting against each other, either in Europe or in Africa or in Asia. You may never know that situation can come up. You know, today the war of Russia is on the threshold of Europe. Who will take the responsibility if the war starts? Macron would not go. He would expect the French people to go and defend the country. Why should they? Because you have, first of all, destroyed the whole concept of nationalism, culture. You are inviting a conflict. You are giving Mirage 2000s to Ukraine. You do not attempt to stop the war. You do not attempt to stop the war either in Middle East or in Ukraine, and you expect your people to pay the mess for it. And then you say, if the right wing comes, this will happen, that will happen. So please vote for me, because I want to keep on creating the mess even more in the future.
Okay.
So I think a lot of course correction for these parties, the centrist parties, is required. My last point, I reiterate, it is often the follies of these so-called liberal parties that bring the right wing to power. It happened during Germany as before 1939 as well. Back to you, Neha.
Okay, interesting. Italy, Hungary, European Parliament, now it's happening in France. Let me take this to Chirayu Thakkar. Chirayu, decode this for us. What exactly is happening currently in France? What explains the surge of the far right? Why are people taking to the streets in protest? How worrying is this situation for President Macron and his centrist bloc? And how close do you think Marine Le Pen's national rally may actually be to even forming a government in France and staking claim to the post of Prime Minister?
Good evening, Neha, and thank you for having me. I think some of the points have been mentioned earlier. This is not a process that has happened in the last couple of years. If you see the rise of what has been called far right in Europe, it's a very long process. But some of the recent episodes have exacerbated their rise and created hyper-fractionized polities within Europe. So one of the major things has been globalization and its role. Many in Europe believe that it may have served European elites and it would have served the upper middle classes, but it has not served average blue-collar worker in Europe. China's point was mentioned. The kind of global trading system that was created, China played the game, gamed the system, and now what we are seeing is that an average European worker does not have the sort of manufacturing job that it would have helped the person survive. So these were some of the long-term trends. Of course, the double whammy of corona pandemic and then subsequently the Russia-Ukraine war has affected the individual on a worse basis. There are so many countries within Europe where the energy prices have become fourfold. So it is but evident that the leaders who usually have promised the good of globalization to everyone, they are now facing the backlash for their own policies of globalization, of their policies of Europeanization, and this has given rise, even the concept of Europe. A lot of people, an average far right supporter or center right supporter in Europe, thinks that the idea of a common market is not supporting them. It may give very good aggregate numbers and it may allow Europe to punch its weights in global negotiations and as a strategic actor, but it is not serving them, it is not serving their purse. So this has been some of the long term trends which has created this hyper fractionized polities. Immigration is another issue which is dividing Europe right now. So within this, I think Macron's decision, especially the snap election decision, has been a mystery right now because nobody exactly knows. I've been listening to and reading to a lot, reading the comments from a lot of European commentators, and what I'm gathering is that best guess right now is that Macron basically wanted that in a worst case scenario, the far right would come and the people would see that their promises on the one hand are different, and when they come to governance their behavior is different, and in the subsequent presidential poll, although he cannot run himself by the cap that has been inserted in the French constitution, but his party would be able to perform better because people would see how these people are in government. That is like one of the arguments placed. The other argument was that if such a kind of a hung assembly situation happens in round one, but we are seeing that there's a three-way split in the vote. Under that situation, they would cobble up some sort of an alliance with some of the center-left parties, preventing far right from coming and again going to the people and saying that we have the vote. So either way, it would eventually, in the short to medium term, going to support Macron. But and we are seeing some evidence. I was just reading a Reuters piece a while ago that they have decided that in specific areas they would cobble up alliance. If the number one individual is from a centrist bloc, the left would take back their candidates, and that way they are going to form some sort of a tactical alliance without making it like a common program and a grand alliance between the center and the left parties. So what happens now from this point onwards remains to be seen. But currently what is going on is a clear nightmare for Macron because this was not the best case scenario that he hoped for. And the three-way split is a very dangerous situation because neither the center agrees with the left nor the center agrees with the right. And this creates a problem for an average French citizen.
Well, certainly this could create a lot of obstacles for governance itself in France and, as you said, for an average French citizen. I need to take another quick break here on Global Lens. We'll continue this conversation on the other side.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
The confidence is certainly back in the market.
Do tighten your seat belt so that you can withstand volatility.
I have one humble request to all the viewers of News9 is that please don't go, there will be a lot of choppiness, there will be a lot of volatility. Look at long term, don't look at short term. Buy quality, don't buy quantity, and wish you all the very best.
हमारा टाइम आ गया है और रहेगा.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
This is News9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the French parliamentary elections. Let me go back to Ambassador Goel at this point. Ambassador Goel, as has been stated by our other panelists, do you believe that in large measure it is a very strong anti-immigration sentiment that is sweeping through Europe and of course other parts of the world as well? Anger over a prohibitive cost of living, lack of jobs, are these some of the factors that are driving the rise of the Far East across the continent?
Neha, thank you very much for me to lead into this. Because when you mentioned the anti-immigration, I was actually thinking about what my co-panelists had said and what actually has fundamentally changed. And the term came to my mind, colonization. And I think I may be overstating what I'm going to say, but the fact is that for the first time in the history, Europe is facing what Asia and Africa had seen before the World War II, before the decolonization. And I would call it the colonization of Europe through immigration, by immigration of people from Algeria into France, people from Africa, other countries, people from Asia, Southeast Asia into France, and the whole texture of the population, the demographic changes which are taking place in Europe as a result of the immigration, changing the whole politics. And therefore, you are absolutely right. I think in that sense, it is basically the immigration and the anti-immigration sentiments which are actually rising in Europe, whether it is France, UK, I was in UK recently, and the number of other races, other communities I saw in UK. And I was not surprised, therefore, that the UK is not really a native white country anymore. It's changed completely. So leaving aside the Central Europe and the Eastern Europe, the Western Europe demographics have changed so rapidly that the politics has changed. So therefore, number one, yes, I would call it that Europe is now seeing, or the Western Europe is now seeing, the colonization that in Asia and Africa had gone through before World War II, and that is the political change that we are witnessing in terms of the political events there, number one. Number two, for me as a diplomat, what really matters is not what happens internally. I may feel passionate about what who wins, who doesn't win, etc., etc. But for me, what is important is, does it matter to India? And if I look at what matters to India in the elections in France is, I need to look at what the policies of RN would be and how Macron had actually opened France and India relationship. And from that point of view, with an exception of protectionism setting in France, in case Marine Le Pen becomes the party comes to power and becomes the head of the government, with the exception of the protectionism. And I think there will be a limit to that because the European Union itself is going to put a limit. And I'm quite sure that France will not want to get out of the European Union. And therefore, if there is a limit, I think whoever wins, it doesn't really matter for India anymore. There are sufficient number of strong linkages of interest, commonality of interest between India and France, and I will not go into details at the moment, which will basically determine that India and France will continue merrily along the same path of upward growth, northwards, as they have been doing during Macron time. So let us see what happens. Interesting time. But it is domestic politics of Europe, and Europe is now seeing exactly what Asia and Africa had seen earlier before the World War II.
This is a fascinating analogy that you've drawn. You're also calling it colonization of Europe by way of immigration. And let's not forget that if Marine Le Pen's National Rally does come to power and forms the next government with their Prime Minister at the helm, it will be the first time that a far-right party would be governing France since World War II, when the country was under Nazi Germany. So this is a historic moment that we are witnessing. A lot is changing for France and for Europe. Let me go back to Pathikrit Pan at this point. Pathikrit Pan, I have a couple of questions for you. Number one, as we know that, the left-wing alliance and the centrist bloc are trying to come together to block National Rally from getting an absolute majority and forming the government. They're calling for tactical voting. We don't know which way this goes, though of course a lot of polls seem to suggest that the National Rally will in fact fall short of an absolute majority. And if that does happen, but it still gains a very large number of seats in the French National Assembly, will that not mean, near complete policy paralysis in France? One. Two, what is the larger message you think that voters are sending out to political parties in Europe? Some might argue that globalists are suddenly on the back foot and isolationists, are gaining ground.
First of all, Neha, if I love my country, if I love my country's borders, if I want my country to be protected, does not make me isolationist. I mean, I have the highest respect for other countries. I want legal immigrants to come in, but not the other way around. See, there are two things happening. If the far right doesn't get majority temporarily, I think a lot of people in France will be happy. The voters of the centrist party or the leftist parties. The issue is, can they prevent the conflicts? They will not be able to prevent the conflicts. So the crisis within many of the countries, including France, will continue to grow, and it will only make Marine Le Pen's party even more popular. So if there is another election in the snap poll in the next year or something, they're going to sweep. That's one. Because Macron will not be able to contain the consequences of what they started. That's one. Secondly, I completely agree with what Goyal sir mentioned about reverse. I would rather call it reverse colonialism. See, I'll tell you, the message is this. Almost a decade back, once when I was in Belgium, I was in Antwerp, a port city in Belgium. I felt I was in Turkey. It was not Belgium. 2000 to have hatred for the country they're coming in. That has not gone down. And that keeps on imploding time and again every time these allowances stop. So the message that is going out from the people is this. Europeans generally in the last 80 years have been okay with multiculturalism. But multiculturalism does not mean that you do away with all the balances and the checks. You bring in immigrants, but to a certain limit. Don't do it to that extent that your demography is completely altered. You want multiculturalism, it's fine, but don't do it to that extent that your own country's culture is completely ignored, vilified, compromised, and put into the dustbin. And last but not the least, you want to decide what the world should do. Don't do all those things which messes up things within your own country. Nobody is interested to fund a war which is only going to create problem with their own country's inflation. Last but not the least, Neha, it's all about security inside your own home. These countries, when they talk about how the world should be, within their own countries, safety has become a big issue because of immigration. I am not blaming all the immigrants. The issue is when you bring a large number of immigrants coming like in hordes, and then what happens? You can't give them food, you can't give them shelter, you can't give them jobs, and they start looting, plundering. They do all kinds of molestation and all kinds of heinous acts, and the government tends to overlook because otherwise it will be termed as right wing. So there is a problem. This problem has to be addressed. The people of France, they have a past, and sometimes karma is going to, taking its toll on them. You may say that, but the reality, the average French or the German that today wants security within their own country. I was told almost a decade back, Neha, in Europe, if you go out at night after 10 o'clock, carry €5 in your purse. If you're caught by a bunch of people and they don't get even a €2, €5 in your pocket, they will break your limbs. That is the condition. I am not trying to be alarmist, but this is what I personally faced. So I'm saying the condition is bad. Today, Macron and many other presidents are facing the same problems, getting backlashes from the same people for the same issues on which they used to give sermons to other countries like India. When India says there's a limitation on issues of illegal immigration, we cannot keep on taking them. There is a problem. I have to first give jobs to my own people. I have to first give jobs, food to my own people. Then I'll think about the world if I have surplus resources. They mess up with their own country's people. That's where the problem is. So far as India's relation with these countries is concerned, look, I had never said, because the issue or discussion was about the perspective of Europe, that's why I mentioned. So far as continuity is concerned, it's going to continue. Whether right wing will be beneficial or not, that's another issue. Continuity will be there, and whoever helps him stopping the conflicts is going to benefit India, because conflicts coming down or stop a closure to the conflicts eventually will result in prices of many critical commodities and energy come down. That is where the issue is. I don't think the centrist parties or even the leftists to a certain extent are very much interested to stop the conflict, and that is going to create situation even more worse. I am not taking a partisan side, but the message is this: stop conflicts, have balances on immigration issue, take care of your own voters, don't ignore your own country for the sake of the world. That's the issue is. Back to you, Neha.
Right, a comprehensive analysis as always by Pathikrit Pine. He is essentially making the point, and he agrees with Ambassador Suresh Goel that this is reverse colonization of sorts, and there is an anti-immigration sentiment on the rise, because in many cases immigrants not only take away jobs of locals but also pose a security threat, he argues. Let me now go back to Chirayu Thakkar. Chirayu, wrap up this discussion for us. A couple of questions. What we are witnessing now in France, do you think this is, an ominous sign, not just for the future of France, but for the future of Europe itself? Do you believe this could have ramifications beyond Europe? We're already seeing what's happening in the United States. If Trump comes back to power, well, then that will also be seen as a win for the right, if not the far right. And also, given the way things are unfolding, what we saw in Paris, I beg your pardon, do you believe there is a real threat of civil unrest in France and perhaps other parts of Europe too, going ahead?
Neha, let's first look at the shadow of time of the phenomenon that you and I are discussing. By the best case estimates, Le Pen's party is winning anywhere between 230 to 260 seats, whereas the majority that is required is 289. So they might well fall short of 30 to 35 or even 50 seats from the clear majority, and create a situation about some of the things that have been discussed, or the possibility of it. But since we are in the realm of possibility, we are talking about all sorts of things. So Nothing is immediately on the doorstep right now. But what we need to pay attention to is that there is a clear trend line in Europe, be it Italy, be it France, or be it other countries. Now, what we are seeing is that if this tendencies, the tendency of shortcomings of multiculturalism that is creating some sort of a backlash domestically, uh, the new rise of isolationist policies, the centrifugal Eurosceptic policies, if these three or four major trends, if they continue to intensify in Europe, what we'll see is that the ability of Europe to play an important role and become a power center, a pole in a multipolar order will weaken. Now, that will have impact on how China plays on the international scene. That will have impact on some of the things that Putin will do in the subsequent years and Putin's successors will do. That will also have an impact on the transatlantic alliance, and especially if you have someone as maverick as Trump coming to the White House, which seems like a possibility after the latest debate. All these things will create more confusion and chaos in the multipolarity, and on the one hand it will provide some opportunities for India, but on the other hand it will have certain order impact which will also be not so conducive for India's rise. Let's be honest, the rise of countries like China and India have happened under certain stable conditions of unipolarity. And they have also been beneficiaries of globalization and some other similar phenomena. Of course, it comes at a cost. There are flip sides to both. So, whether the kind of confusion and chaos, whether intensifying conflicts, whether Europe's ability to behave as a strategic actor in a multipolar situation, all these challenges, how it is going to impact India's rise, that is also something we have to think about when we look from New Delhi's vantage point. So, since you have asked me to wrap up and sum up the situation, right now we don't have to be alarmist. Nothing is at doorstep, but the trend lines are clear, visible. They are getting bolder. They are intensifying, and what everyone needs to look at, especially at Europe, because even though one individual country in Europe may not be powerful, but collectively as a bloc, Europe still is a very important power center, technology center. It is one of the largest markets. And even though it doesn't have a collective security arrangement of its own, of course, it's reliant on US on so many issues. But despite that, it is still a very important strategic player as well. And therefore, this will impact have an impact at a macro level as well as on a micro level on the lives of people, and therefore this phenomenon needs to be studied, discussed as we are doing right now. And if this goes further, spirals into in a negative dimension, or it descends into a chaos, it will not be good for anyone. So that is something we need to think about.
All right. Chaos is, of course, not good for anyone at all. And let's certainly hope that Europe is not headed for chaos. Many, of course, have warned of an impending, impending civil unrest. Let's certainly hope it doesn't come to that. On that note, Ambassador Suresh Goyal, Chirayu Thakkar, Pathikrit Payan, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. We look forward to having all of you back after the second round of voting in the French parliamentary election. All right, let's now turn our attention to some big news coming in from the United States. An important decision from the US Supreme Court has fundamentally altered the legal landscape surrounding former presidents in criminal prosecution. In a 6-3 ruling, the court has granted immunity to former presidents for actions taken within their constitutional authority while in office. This decision marks the first time in US history that the Supreme Court has officially recognized such broad immunity for former presidents in any instance. Chief Justice John Roberts delivered the opinion on behalf of the conservative majority, with the court's 3 liberal justices dissenting. The ruling comes in response to former President Donald Trump's appeal seeking protection from criminal charges related to efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. The Supreme Court suggested that Trump could be entitled to immunity from prosecution for official acts while president, but that this protection would not apply to his acts as a private citizen. The lower court must now decide whether he was acting officially or in his private capacity. The delay in Trump's trial due to the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity means that he's unlikely to face a trial in this case before the November presidential election. Earlier, Trump had argued that his actions were protected because they were taken while he served as president. Special counsel Jack Smith, opposing this claim, has argued that presidential immunity could shield leaders from accountability for serious offences, including attempts to subvert elections. The court's decision, arriving on the last day of its term, has significant implications for Trump's legal battles. The delay in resolving the immunity issue has already impacted the timing of any potential trial, making it unlikely that a verdict would be reached before the election. Trump, who faces multiple criminal charges, including conspiracy and obstruction, is the first former US president to be prosecuted criminally. His legal team had pressed for absolute immunity to shield him from prosecution, arguing that without it, sitting presidents could face undue pressure from political rivals. With the court's ruling, the focus now shifts to the broader implications for presidential accountability and the ongoing legal challenges facing Donald Trump as he continues to contest all criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions. And as we wrap up this edition of Global Lens, let's get you the latest on the UK general elections that are now just 3 days away. The general election in UK for the 650 seats in the House of Commons will be held on the 4th of July after Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced snap polls on the 22nd of May. Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition Labour Party and favourite to become Britain's next Prime Minister, has said that he would quit if his party failed to win the 4th July election. Labour is around 20 percentage points ahead in most opinion polls and forecast to comfortably win enough parliamentary seats to form the next government, ending Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's tenure and 14 years of the Conservative government. However, Rishi Sunak has dismissed suggestions that his party is headed for a rout. Sunak says he believes he would still be in power by the end of the week, despite opinion polls that have found the Conservatives trailing far behind the opposition Labour Party of Keir Starmer. Meanwhile, Starmer is projected to win a historic mandate in the upcoming general election. The Liberal Democrats too are likely to achieve their best ever performance. Parties contesting the polls released their manifestos detailing their stand on issues including the economy, the National Health Service, immigration and the UK's relationship with the European Union. The main parties in the fray are the Conservatives led by Rishi Sunak, the Labour Party led by Keir Starmer, the Reform UK led by Nigel Farage and the Liberal Democrats led by Ed Davey. There are many who've even said that it might be difficult for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to even save his own seat. Well, are the predictions going to come true come the 4th of July? I guess we will find out. That's all the time we have on the show tonight. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us at the same time tomorrow.
There are beautiful golf courses, there are well-played golf courses, there are great greens. But I think we are a combination of everything.
Now, because of the nature-friendly atmosphere here, plenty of water, you can hear the birds. So lots and lots of birds live on this golf course.
Every corner you have a different vista. You have the beautiful Sayadri range behind you and it's just endless. It keeps going on and on and on and on. So I think no matter